Good day, my name is Scott Kinney with Discovery Education, and this is One Idea. Today I am joined with Dr. John Hill. Dr. Hill is currently the Executive Director of the National Rural Education Association, but in his former workings in life, he was a math teacher, a principal, an assistant superintendent, a superintendent, and has now taken over the Rural School Association. So, Dr. Hill, first off, could you tell us just a little bit about NREA, your mission?
Sure. The National Rural Education is currently in its 107th year. We're really three organizations in one. Basically, we're a networking organization, NREA. We do research on rural schools. We distribute that research. We get together once a year and do a lot of networking. And then we try to find products and services specifically for rural schools and get the word out on those kinds of things. We have another arm that does some lobbying, the NREAC, and then we have an NREA foundation which helps fund some of the projects of NREA. So we've been around for a long time. We have members in all 50 states. We have members in Canada, South Korea, Germany, Japan, Australia. So that's the executive summary of NREA.
That's fascinating. So, we were talking before our conversation around hiring, and one of my favorite books is something called "It's Good to Great." So there's a great line in there that I tend to look back on frequently. It's getting the right people on the bus and getting them in the right seats. You made a comment that in your as a superintendent, one of the board members said something to the effect of, we would spend $2 to $3 million on maybe a capital project. We'd have hearings, we'd have people come in, we'd have community input. But when we hire a teacher in our classroom, and if we keep them for the span of their career, that might be considerably costly as well, similar to a $2-3 million spend. So that was something you really focused on, was that hiring process. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think that the whole hiring process, if we want to eliminate a lot of our troubles, that we ought to be more thorough up front in our hiring process. So one of the things that we did is we began to give our applicants surveys. They began as online surveys. Today they've morphed into telephone surveys, online surveys, and in-person interviews. But it was to give us a real picture of how that person thought, how they felt about the act of teaching, how they felt about their work, and so forth. And over the years, that's changed the kind of candidates that we look at now. Our candidates are more service-oriented, and in some instances more student-oriented, but that made a big difference. The other thing that I think made a big difference for us is we asked our principals to be more thorough in their research and into the background of their candidates prior to bringing them in for interviews and talking with them. It had been my experience as I watched principals and even my own experience in the past, where sometimes you have a favorite candidate and you do all the research right after you've decided this is the one I want, and then you would check them out. And we've reversed that process. And again, I think it's changed the kind of candidates that we were receiving.
Now, are the surveys something that you created at your local school system, or did you borrow those from other people's thinking?
We borrowed those from other people's thinking. Actually, the original surveys came from the Gallup organization. They had a tool called Teacher Insight at that time that they used, and they measured what was called the teacher heart. And some of the employees from Gallup have gone and formed other companies. And so there are other companies, I think a company called Ventures that does pretty much the same thing. But again, it's something that we didn't create, but it's really a great idea and gives you a lot of insight into candidates.
Now, how often do you find that your kind of gut instinct on a candidate really disagrees with those surveys?
In the end, it's not very often.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think the more experience you've had in schools, you get a feel for the kinds of personalities that will fit into your community. But what you don't have a feel for sometimes is how people feel about their job per se, or how they feel about interacting with children. Those are insights that are not only important to know, but it also gives you clues on how to work with that person once they're on board.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of the things then outside the survey, really looking into their past performance and some of their prior teaching experience. If I'm a principal in a school system and I'm bringing on some new teachers this year, what advice would you give me as far as how could I go about that process? I mean, I think the typical is there are 3 names on a list and I'm going to call all 3 of them and that's about it. But I suspect you have something else in mind.
I think if I were given 3 names on a list, I would take that list and do as many background checks as I could. Not only check the references that they give you, and you would expect those to be good or they probably wouldn't put them down, but you also want to check other people that you know in that community who may know of their work, or just pick up the phone and call people from that district that might know of their work. And you know, in this day and age, you can find out a lot on the internet. There are ways to do that. And I know that there are some districts, smaller districts can't afford it, but there are larger districts that literally employ people to do background checks for them.
Right. So, John, what was the end result? I mean, as you kind of went through this process and instituted, what did you see? Was it a cultural change? Was it an academic performance change? How did you measure that impact over time?
The first thing we saw is a different kind of candidate. One that's more service oriented, and that's really important, we think, in working with children. So that was the first thing. But we saw a candidate that was willing to learn new ideas or willing to share new ideas. Sometimes in schools we have culture where somebody walks in with a new idea and there's a little pushback, and over time you see a group of people that can work better together. They do more sharing, those kinds of things. And in the end, that results in better performance of students.
Yeah, very good. So, Dr. Hill, I appreciate your time today. This is, I think we could probably both agree, a lot of people's work, but I think Marzano is one of them who talks about the most important thing in education is a quality teacher in front of every child, and you taking steps to actually, make sure that we do that and do right by children. So, this is Dr. John Hill, Executive Director of the National Rural Education Association. Dr. Hill, thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much.